The gunshot echoed across the plains of Wyoming Territory, 1872, but Vaughn Blackett didn't flinch. He merely tightened his grip on the reins and urged his stallion faster through the tall grass, the afternoon sun beating down on his broad shoulders as he outran not just the bandits behind him, but the memories that haunted him with every heartbeat. Vaughn had been riding for the better part of 3 days, his destination the small but growing town of Whispering Creek. Word had spread through the territory of work to be found there, and Vaughn needed work more than most. He needed anything to occupy his mind, to exhaust his body so thoroughly that when night fell, he might actually sleep without seeing her face. The town appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent, a collection of wooden structures nestled in a valley between rolling hills. Vaughn slowed his horse to a walk as he approached, noting the typical establishments of a frontier settlement: a general store, a saloon, a small church, and various other businesses catering to the needs of settlers and travelers alike. As he guided his horse down the main street, dust rising with each hoofbeat, Vaughn pulled his hat lower over his eyes. He'd learned that looking at people invited questions, and questions led to conversations he had no interest in having. His beard, grown thick over the past months, served as additional armor against the world. "Whoa there," he murmured to his horse, bringing him to a stop outside the livery stable. A boy of about 16 hurried out to greet him. "Take good care of him," Vaughn said, handing over the reins and a coin. "He's carried me far." "Yes, sir," the boy replied. "You staying in town long?" Vaughn hesitated. "Long enough." He collected his saddlebags and rifle, slung them over his shoulder, and headed toward the hotel. The town was alive with activity, despite the late hour. Miners, cowboys, and settlers mingled on the wooden sidewalks, their voices creating a constant hum that Vaughn found oddly comforting. Noise meant distraction, and distraction meant fewer moments lost to memories. The Whispering Creek Hotel was modest, but clean. Vaughn secured a room on the second floor, paid for a week in advance, and made his way upstairs without engaging in more conversation than absolutely necessary. The room was sparse: a bed, a washstand, a small table and chair, but it was more than he needed. He set his belongings down, removed his hat, and ran a hand through his dark hair, grimacing at the grime accumulated from days on the trail. A knock at the door startled him, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. "Just bringing fresh towels and water, sir," came a woman's voice. "Leave them," Vaughn replied, his voice rougher than he intended. "As you wish." He waited until he heard footsteps retreating before opening the door and retrieving the items. After washing the trail dust from his face and hands, he stood at the window, looking down at the main street below. The saloon across the way was brightly lit, piano music drifting through its swinging doors. Normally, he'd seek out a game of cards, a glass of whiskey, anything to pass the evening hours, but tonight he felt too weary for even that small effort. Sleep, however, proved elusive as always. Lying on the bed, Vaughn stared at the ceiling, his mind wandering back to the ranch in Montana, to the life he'd built and lost, to Eliza, to the promise he'd made and failed to keep. Morning came with little relief, but Vaughn rose with the sun nonetheless. There was work to be found, and idleness was his enemy. After a quick breakfast at the hotel dining room, he made his way to the local ranch that was rumored to be hiring. The Clearwater Ranch was the largest in the area, sprawling across several hundred acres outside of town. The owner, Howard Clearwater, was reputedly fair but demanding, expecting a full day's work for a fair day's pay. Vaughn rode out to the main house shortly after dawn, finding the ranch already alive with activity, looking for work. Asked a gruff man in his 50s, emerging from the barn as Vaughn dismounted. Know anything about ranching," Vaughn nodded. "Ran my own place for 5 years in Montana." The man sized him up. "I'm Howard Clearwater. Why'd you leave Montana?" For a moment, Vaughn considered lying but decided against it. "Lost everything in a fire, wife included." Howard's expression softened slightly. "Sorry to hear that. We've got a bunkhouse for the hands, but there's a small cabin available if you prefer your privacy. Pays $3 a day, meals included." "I'll take it," Vaughn said, offering his hand. "Welcome to Clearwater Ranch, Mr. Blackett." "Vaughn Blackett," Howard nodded. "Get yourself settled, then find my foreman, Cal. He'll put you to work." The cabin was little more than a single room with a bed and stove, but it was private, and that's what mattered to Vaughn. He stowed his few belongings and headed back to the main ranch yard, where he found Cal, a tall man with a shock of white hair and weathered skin that spoke of decades under the western sun. "You the new hand?" Cal asked, eyeing Vaughn with mild curiosity. "Vaughn Blackett, Cal Thompson." "Howard says you know ranching." "I do." "Good. We're short-handed with the spring calving. Need someone who knows what they're doing." For the next week, Vaughn threw himself into the work, rising before dawn and working until his muscles ached and his mind was too tired to wander. The physical labor was exactly what he needed, demanding enough to keep him focused on the present, exhausting enough that sleep, when it came, was deep and dreamless. The other ranch hands were a diverse group: former soldiers, drifters, young men seeking adventure in the West. They were curious about the newcomer, but Vaughn's taciturn nature soon earned him a reputation as a man who preferred his own company. They respected his skills and his work ethic, and after a time, they stopped trying to draw him into their evening conversations and card games. Vaughn made his first trip back into Whispering Creek on a Saturday afternoon, a list of supplies needed for the ranch tucked into his pocket. The town was busier than when he'd arrived, with wagons and horses tied up outside most establishments. He made his way to the general store, nodding briefly to those he passed, but avoiding prolonged eye contact. The list was substantial: tools, seeds, household items for the main ranch house, and Vaughn found himself waiting while the storekeeper, a portly man named Jenkins, gathered everything together. "New to town, aren't you?" Jenkins asked as he measured out coffee beans. "Working out at Clearwater's place," Vaughn replied, hoping the minimal response would discourage further conversation. "Good man, Howard. Lost his wife about 10 years back, raised that daughter of his all on his own." Vaughn hadn't been aware that Howard had a daughter, but then again, he hadn't asked. He nodded politely and turned his attention to the window, watching the activity on the street outside. A young woman was crossing the street, her arms laden with packages. She was wearing a simple blue dress, her honey blonde hair partially tucked under a straw bonnet. There was something about her determined stride, the set of her shoulders, that caught Vaughn's attention. Just as she reached the middle of the street, a wagon came tearing around the corner, the driver struggling to control the team of horses. The woman froze, her eyes widening as the wagon bore down on her. Without thinking, Vaughn bolted from the store. He reached the woman in seconds, wrapping an arm around her waist and pulling her out of the path of the oncoming wagon. They tumbled to the ground together, packages scattering across the dusty street as the wagon rumbled past, the driver shouting apologies over his shoulder. "Are you all right?" Vaughn asked, helping the woman to her feet. For the first time, he got a clear look at her face. Her eyes were an unusual shade of green, clear as mountain pools, and currently wide with shock. Her features were delicate but strong, high cheekbones, a determined chin, full lips currently parted in surprise. Yes, thank you," she stammered, brushing dust from her skirt. You saved my life." Vaughn bent to retrieve her scattered packages. "Anyone would have done the same." "Perhaps, but you were the one who did," she smiled, and something in Vaughn's chest tightened painfully. "I'm Catherine Clearwater, Kate to my friends, Clearwater, Howard's daughter." Vaughn handed her the packages. "Vaughn Blackett, I work for your father." The new hand from Montana." "Father mentioned you." She studied his face with interest. "He said you keep to yourself." Vaughn felt uncomfortable under her scrutiny. "I should get back to the store. Your father's waiting on supplies." "Of course." She hesitated, then added, "Will you be at the social next Saturday?" "The town holds one every month at the meeting hall. I'm not one for socials." "That's a shame. It's a good way to meet people in town." Vaughn tipped his hat. "Good day, Miss Clearwater. It's Kate," she called after him, "and thank you again, Mr. Blackett." Back in the store, Vaughn found Jenkins had finished assembling the supplies. He paid for them, loaded them onto the wagon Howard had provided, and headed back to the ranch, trying to ignore the lingering sensation of Kate Clearwater in his arms. The encounter with Kate left Vaughn unsettled for days afterward. He threw himself into his work with even greater fervor, volunteering for the most strenuous tasks around the ranch. If the other hands noticed his increased intensity, they didn't comment. Howard Clearwater, however, was more observant. He approached Vaughn one evening as he was mending tack in the barn. "You're working yourself mighty hard, Blackett," Howard said. Leaning against the stall door, Vaughn didn't look up from the leather he was stitching. "Earning my keep." "From what Cal tells me, you're earning the keep of 3 men. Howard paused. "Met my daughter in town, I hear." Now Vaughn did look up. "She mentioned it. Said you saved her from being run down by a wagon." Howard studied him. "She also said you declined her invitation to the social." "I'm not much for socializing." Howard nodded thoughtfully. "Grief can make a man want to hide from the world. I know something about that. Lost my Margaret to fever 10 years ago." Vaughn set down his work. "I'm sorry for your loss, and I for yours. But let me tell you something I learned the hard way. Hiding from life doesn't honor those we've lost." "With all due respect, Mr. Clearwater, I'm not hiding. I'm working." Howard smiled sadly. "Call it what you will. I did the same after Margaret died. Threw myself into this ranch, barely saw my own daughter for nearly a year. If it hadn't been for her stubbornness, her refusal to let me disappear into my grief, I might not be standing here today." Vaughn remained silent, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I'm not saying you need to attend the social," Howard continued, "but Kate's organizing a Sunday dinner for the hands tomorrow. I'd consider it a personal favor if you'd join us." Put that way, Vaughn found it difficult to refuse. "I'll be there." "Good man, 2 o'clock at the main house." When Howard had gone, Vaughn returned to his mending, but his thoughts were elsewhere. It had been 18 months since the fire, 18 months of drifting from place to place, working just long enough to earn money for the next journey. Nowhere had felt right, nowhere had felt like a place he could stay. But something about Whispering Creek, about Clearwater Ranch, felt different. Perhaps it was the honest work or the fair treatment from Howard. Or perhaps, whispered a voice he tried to ignore, it was the memory of green eyes and a grateful smile. Sunday afternoon found Vaughn standing on the porch of the main house, hat in hand, hair still damp from the bath he'd taken in the creek. He'd put on his one clean shirt and had even attempted to trim his beard, though the results were less than perfect. Kate opened the door before he could knock, her face lighting up with a smile that made his heart skip a beat. "Mr. Blackett, I'm so glad you decided to come." She stood back, gesturing him inside. "Please come in. Father's just opened a bottle of his prized whiskey." The main house was comfortable and well-appointed, with furniture that had clearly been transported at great expense from the east. Howard greeted him with a glass of amber liquid, and Vaughn found himself ushered into a parlor where several of the other hands were already gathered, looking as uncomfortable in their Sunday best as he felt. Kate moved through the room with easy grace, making sure everyone had drinks and engaging each man in conversation. When she reached Vaughn, she lowered her voice. "I wanted to thank you again for the other day. I was so flustered I don't think I properly expressed my gratitude." "No need," Vaughn replied, taking a sip of his whiskey. "Like I said, anyone would have done the same," she smiled. "You're determined to avoid any recognition, aren't you? Father said you're from Montana originally." "That's right. What brought you to Wyoming?" Vaughn hesitated. "Change of scenery." Kate's eyes, perceptive and kind, studied his face. "Sometimes change is exactly what we need, isn't it?" Before Vaughn could respond, Howard announced that dinner was served, and they all moved to the dining room. The meal was elaborate by ranch standards: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables from Kate's garden. The conversation flowed easily, with the hands sharing stories and jokes, and Kate laughing at all the right moments. Vaughn found himself watching her more than participating, noting the way she included everyone, the genuine interest she showed in each person's words. She caught him looking once and smiled, a private smile that felt like a shared secret. After dinner, some of the men went outside to smoke, while others gathered around Howard as he told tales of the early days of the territory. Vaughn slipped away to the porch, needing a moment of quiet. The sun was setting, painting the landscape in golds and purples. He leaned against the railing, breathing in the cool evening air, feeling more at peace than he had in months. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" He turned to find Kate standing beside him, her face glowing in the fading light. "It is. When I was a child, I used to think God painted the sky differently every evening just to see if we were paying attention." Vaughn smiled despite himself. "That's a nice thought." They stood in companionable silence for a moment before Kate spoke again. "Father says you had a ranch in Montana." Vaughn tensed. "I did." "What happened, if you don't mind my asking?" "Fire," he said after a long pause. "Lost everything." Kate's expression softened with understanding. "I'm so sorry, that must have been devastating." "It was a long time ago." 18 months, Father said. When Vaughn looked at her in surprise, she added, "He makes it his business to know about the men who work for him." "And you make it your business to know your father's business," she laughed, the sound clear and bright in the evening air. "I suppose I do. Someone has to look after him, and the ranch interests me. Always has." Vaughn could see it, the intelligence in her eyes, the way she carried herself with confidence. "You help run things. I do the books, manage the household, and I've been known to help with calving when we're short-handed." Her chin lifted slightly, as if expecting challenge. Instead, Vaughn nodded. "Your father's lucky to have you. Thank you for that. Some men find it odd, a woman taking an interest in ranching." "My wife helped run our place," Vaughn said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "She could rope a calf and keep the books and still have dinner on the table by sundown." It was the first time he'd spoken of Eliza to anyone since the fire, and he immediately regretted it. The pain, always just below the surface, threatened to overwhelm him. Kate seemed to sense his distress. She placed a gentle hand on his arm. "She sounds remarkable." Vaughn nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "Would you tell me her name?" Kate asked softly. "Eliza," he managed. "Her name was Eliza. That's a beautiful name." Kate's hand remained on his arm, a warm presence that somehow anchored him. "Thank you for sharing that with me." They stood together in silence as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge. Eventually, the sound of the other hands preparing to leave broke the moment. "I should go," Vaughn said, stepping away from her touch. "Will I see you at the social on Saturday?" Kate asked, her eyes hopeful. Vaughn hesitated, then shook his head. "I don't think so, Miss Clearwater." "Kate," she corrected gently. "And I understand. But the invitation stands, should you change your mind." The week following the Sunday dinner passed quickly, filled with the usual ranch duties. Vaughn found himself working alongside Howard more often than not, the older man sharing his knowledge of the territory and the cattle business. Despite his initial reluctance, Vaughn found himself engaging with the other hands more frequently as well, occasionally joining their conversations around the evening fire. But it was thoughts of Kate that occupied his mind in quiet moments. Her kindness, her intelligence, the way she'd listened when he spoke of Eliza. It had been so long since he'd allowed himself to think of Eliza without being consumed by grief and guilt, and somehow Kate had made it possible, if only for a moment. Saturday arrived, and Vaughn told himself he would spend the evening in his cabin, perhaps reading one of the books Howard had lent him. But as the sun began to set, he found himself restless. The social would be starting soon in town, and the thought of Kate there, perhaps wondering if he would appear, nagged at him. "This is foolishness," he muttered to himself as he changed into his cleanest shirt and attempted to neaten his beard once more. Yet 20 minutes later, he was on his horse, riding toward town. The meeting hall was lit up and buzzing with activity when he arrived. Music spilled out into the night: a fiddle, a piano, and what sounded like a harmonica. Vaughn tied his horse at the hitching post, straightened his vest, and stood outside for a long moment, questioning his decision to come. He was about to turn and leave when the door opened and Kate stepped out, as if his thoughts had summoned her. She was wearing a green dress that matched her eyes, her hair arranged in a more elaborate style than he'd seen before. She looked lovely, and the sight of her stole his breath. "Mr. Blackett," she exclaimed, her face lighting up. "You came, Vaughn," he said, finding his voice. "If I'm to call you Kate, then you should call me Vaughn." Her smile widened. "Vaughn, then. I'm so glad you decided to join us. Please come in." The meeting hall had been transformed with lanterns and bunting. A space had been cleared for dancing, and several couples were already moving to the lively tune being played by a small group of musicians. Along one wall, tables laden with food and drink had been set up, and clusters of people stood chatting and laughing. Kate led Vaughn through the crowd, introducing him to various townspeople. He nodded and shook hands, trying to remember names, but his awareness was centered on the woman beside him, the light touch of her hand on his arm, the sound of her voice, the scent of lavender that surrounded her. "Would you like some punch?" she asked after they had made the rounds. "Please." She returned moments later with 2 cups, handing one to him. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come." "So was I," he admitted. "What changed your mind?" Vaughn met her gaze. "You did." A blush crept into her cheeks, but she held his gaze steadily. "I'm glad." The music changed to a slower waltz and Kate set down her cup. "Would you dance with me, Vaughn? It's been a long time since I danced." "Like riding a horse," she said with a smile. "The body remembers." He set his cup aside and offered his hand. Kate placed her fingers in his and he led her onto the dance floor. Drawing her into his arms, he began to move to the music, surprised at how naturally it came back to him. "See, your body remembers," Kate said softly. And it did, but it remembered other things too, the feeling of a woman in his arms, the closeness, the connection he had denied himself for so long. Dancing with Kate was both familiar and entirely new, and Vaughn found himself both terrified and exhilarated by the sensations coursing through him. They danced through 3 songs before Vaughn needed a break, the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. They stepped outside into the cool night air, Kate fetching her shawl to ward off the chill. "You dance beautifully," she said as they walked a little way from the hall, the music fading into the background. "Eliza taught me," Vaughn replied, surprised at how easily her name came to his lips now. "She loved to dance," Kate smiled. "Will you tell me about her?" "Only if you want to, of course." Vaughn hesitated, then found himself speaking. "We met when I was driving cattle to market in Denver. She was the daughter of the man who bought my steers. She was full of life, laughed all the time. Said she'd never marry a rancher because they were too boring, then married me 6 months later." Kate laughed softly. "She sounds wonderful." She was. Smart, too, better head for business than I ever had. He paused, the memories flooding back. "We built the ranch together from nothing to something we were proud of, had 5 good years." "What happened?" Kate asked gently. Vaughn stared into the darkness. "I was in town getting supplies. The fire started while I was gone. By the time I got back." His voice trailed off. Kate's hand found his, her fingers warm against his palm. "It wasn't your fault, Vaughn. I should have been there." "And then what? You might have died too. Maybe that would have been better." Kate's fingers tightened on his. "Don't say that. Never say that." The fierceness in her voice made him look at her. In the moonlight, her face was both soft and determined, her eyes bright with emotion. "Life is precious, Vaughn. Every moment. I lost my mother when I was 13, and not a day goes by that I don't miss her. But I'm grateful for every day I have, for every sunset, every rainstorm, every moment of laughter or beauty or connection. Eliza gave you 5 years of love. Don't diminish that gift by wishing your life away." Her words struck him like a physical blow, cutting through layers of grief and guilt. For the first time since the fire, Vaughn felt something shift inside him, a crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. "You're a remarkable woman, Kate Clearwater," he said quietly. She smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "No, just someone who's learned that life goes on, even when we think it can't. And sometimes, if we're very fortunate, it offers us second chances." The moment between them stretched, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then, from the meeting hall, the music swelled, breaking the spell. "We should go back inside," Kate said, though she made no move to release his hand. "In a minute," Vaughn replied. "I'm enjoying the quiet." They stood together under the stars, hands linked, each lost in their own thoughts yet somehow connected. Vaughn found himself studying Kate's profile, the delicate line of her nose, the curve of her lips, the way the moonlight caught in her hair. When they finally returned to the social, something had changed between them, a tentative understanding born of shared confidences. They danced again, and this time Vaughn held her a little closer, his body remembering not just the steps but the joy that could be found in such simple connection. As the evening drew to a close, Vaughn offered to escort Kate home. Howard had already left, citing an early morning, and had entrusted his daughter to the care of friends. Kate accepted Vaughn's offer with a smile that warmed him from the inside out. They rode side by side through the quiet town, Kate seated comfortably on her mare, her skirts arranged modestly. The moon lit their way, casting long shadows across the rutted road. "Thank you for coming tonight," Kate said as they approached the ranch. "I know it wasn't easy for you." "I'm glad I did," Vaughn replied and realized he meant it. For the first time in 18 months, he had spent an evening not trying to outrun his memories, but instead allowing them to exist alongside new experiences. At the main house, Vaughn dismounted and helped Kate down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. He walked her to the door, acutely aware of her presence beside him. "Good night, Vaughn," she said softly, turning to face him. I hope we can do this again sometime." "I'd like that," he replied, surprised at his own certainty. She smiled and leaned forward, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. "Sleep well." As he rode back to his cabin, Vaughn touched the spot where her lips had brushed his skin, a warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the mild spring night. For the first time since the fire, he allowed himself to consider the possibility of a future different from the lonely existence he had resigned himself to. In the weeks that followed, Vaughn found himself spending more and more time with Kate. They rode together on her daily inspections of the ranch, their conversations flowing easily from ranch business to more personal matters. Kate shared stories of her childhood, of her mother's illness and death, of her determination to help her father preserve the ranch she loved. Vaughn, in turn, found himself opening up about his own past his years as a young cowhand, his dreams of having his own place, the joy he and Eliza had found in building something together. Each shared confidence, each moment of connection, eased the tight grip of grief around his heart. He began to notice the beauty around him again, the sweep of the Wyoming sky, the rich colors of sunset, the delicate wildflowers Kate pointed out on their rides. And he noticed Kate, her quiet strength, her quick mind, her capacity for joy despite the losses she had endured. Howard watched their growing closeness with a mixture of concern and approval. One evening, as Vaughn was helping him repair a section of fence, he broached the subject directly. "My daughter seems quite taken with you, Blackett." Vaughn paused in his work. "She's a fine woman, Mr. Clearwater." "That she is." Howard drove a nail into the fence post with more force than necessary. "She's also the most important thing in my life. I don't want to see her hurt." "Neither do I." Howard studied him. "You're still carrying a heavy load of grief. That's natural, and I respect it. But Kate, she deserves someone who can offer her a whole heart, not just pieces." Vaughn set down his hammer. "I know that. I've told myself the same thing 100 times, and yet you continue to seek her company." "I do," Howard sighed. "Do you care for her, Vaughn, truly care for her?" The question hung in the air between them. Vaughn thought of Kate's smile, her laughter, the way she listened when he spoke, the feeling of rightness he experienced in her presence. "I do," he said finally. "More than I thought possible." Howard nodded slowly. "Then you need to decide if you're ready to start living again, truly living. Because that's what Kate deserves, a man who's fully present, not just existing." The conversation stayed with Vaughn long after they had finished their work. That night, lying in his cabin, he confronted the question he had been avoiding. Was he ready to open his heart again? The very thought filled him with both longing and fear. He took out the small wooden box he kept under his bed, the only possession he had salvaged from the fire. Inside was Eliza's wedding ring, blackened by smoke but still intact. He held it in his palm, remembering the day he had placed it on her finger, the promises they had made to each other. "What would you want for me, Eliza?" he whispered to the empty room. In the silence that followed, he found he knew the answer. Eliza, who had embraced life so fully, who had found joy in every day, would not have wanted him to spend the rest of his years in mourning. She would have wanted him to live, to love again if he could. The realization brought tears to his eyes, but they were different from the tears of grief he had shed before. These felt cleansing, like a spring rain washing away winter's debris. He carefully placed the ring back in its box, but instead of hiding it away, he set it on the small table beside his bed. A reminder not of what he had lost, but of what he had been fortunate enough to have, and of the possibility that life might yet hold more for him. The next day was Sunday, and Vaughn made his way to the main house for the weekly dinner that had become a tradition. Kate greeted him at the door, her face lighting up at the sight of him. "You're early," she said, stepping back to let him in. "I was hoping to speak with you before the others arrived." A flicker of concern crossed her features. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," he assured her. I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For showing me that there's still beauty in the world. For helping me remember what it feels like to be fully alive." Kate's expression softened. "Oh, Vaughn. I've been lost for a long time, Kate, wandering with no purpose, no direction, but since I met you, since you kissed my cheek that night after the social." He took a deep breath. "I've started to find my way back." Kate took his hand, her fingers warm against his. "I'm glad, so very glad." "I don't know what the future holds," Vaughn continued. "I can't make promises, but I know that I care for you more than I thought possible." "I care for you too," Kate said softly. "And I don't need promises, Vaughn, just your honesty, always." Vaughn lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "That I can give you." The sound of riders approaching broke the moment. Kate squeezed his hand once more before releasing it, but the look they shared held the promise of conversations to come. The dinner was lively, with ranch hands and neighbors filling the Clearwater dining room. Vaughn found himself participating in the conversation more than usual, even sharing a humorous story about a stubborn mule from his Montana days that had everyone laughing. Throughout the meal, he was acutely aware of Kate's presence, the quick glances they exchanged, the private smile she gave him when no one else was looking. After dinner, as the guests scattered to the porch or the parlor, Kate touched Vaughn's arm. "Would you like to see the garden? It's lovely in the evening light." He followed her outside to a small but well-tended garden behind the house. Roses climbed a trellis, and neat rows of vegetables promised summer bounty. A bench sat beneath a flowering apple tree, and Kate led him to it. "My mother started this garden," she said as they sat down. "I've tried to keep it as she would have wanted." "It's beautiful," Vaughn replied. "She would be proud." Kate smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I like to think so. I was so young when she died. Sometimes I worry my memories of her are fading." "Tell me about her," Vaughn said, taking her hand in his. Kate looked surprised, then grateful. "She was gentle but strong. She could calm my father with just a look when his temper got the better of him. And she sang all the time while cooking, gardening, even riding, said it made the work lighter." "She sounds wonderful." She was. Kate's thumb traced patterns on his palm. "When she was dying, she made me promise to take care of father, but also to find my own happiness. For years, I thought those two promises might be at odds with each other. And now," Kate met his gaze, her eyes clear and direct, "now I'm starting to believe that perhaps they're not." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with possibility. Vaughn lifted his free hand to touch her cheek, his fingers light against her skin. "Kate," he began, but words failed him. She leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "Yes." Instead of speaking, Vaughn closed the distance between them, pressing his lips to hers in a gentle kiss. Kate responded immediately, her hand coming up to rest on his chest, just over his heart. The kiss was tender, tentative, a first exploration rather than a claiming. When they parted, Kate's eyes remained closed for a moment, a small smile playing at her lips. "I've been hoping you would do that," she whispered. "I've been wanting to," Vaughn admitted. "For longer than I've been willing to acknowledge." She opened her eyes, studying his face. "Are you all right?" He understood what she was asking, if the kiss had brought guilt or regret. "Yes," he said, somewhat surprised to find it was true. "I'm more than all right." Kate's smile widened. "Good." They stayed in the garden until twilight deepened into night, talking softly, sharing occasional kisses, enjoying the simple pleasure of being together without pretense or barriers. When Vaughn finally took his leave, walking back to his cabin under a sky brilliant with stars, he felt lighter than he had in years. The grief was still there, would always be a part of him, but it no longer defined him. Something new was taking root in his heart, something that felt suspiciously like hope. Over the following weeks, that hope grew stronger. Vaughn and Kate spent every available moment together, riding the ranch's boundaries, working side by side during cattle drives, sharing quiet evenings on the porch of the main house. Howard, seeing the change in both his daughter and his ranch hand, gave them his tacit approval, though he still cast occasional concerned glances Vaughn's way. The town of Whispering Creek noticed the budding romance as well. When Vaughn accompanied Kate to church on Sundays or escorted her to the monthly socials, they became the subject of gentle gossip and knowing smiles. Vaughn, who had once avoided the townspeople's attention, found he didn't mind. Being seen with Kate, being known as the man who cared for her, filled him with a pride he hadn't expected. One hot July afternoon, Vaughn was working with several other hands to repair a section of fencing that had been damaged in a recent storm. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the men worked stripped to their waists, sweat glistening on their skin. Kate rode up with canteens of fresh water, her own face flushed from the heat. She dismounted, distributing the water among the grateful men. When she reached Vaughn, their fingers brushed, and he saw the quick intake of her breath as her eyes took in his bare torso. "Thank you," he said, taking a long drink. "You're welcome." Her gaze lingered on him for a moment before she collected herself. "Father sent me to tell you there's a town meeting tonight, something about the railroad possibly coming through. Will you be going? Of course. Will you come with us?" Vaughn nodded. "I'll clean up and meet you at the house." Kate smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners in a way that never failed to make his heart skip. "I'll look forward to it." As she rode away, Cal, who had been working nearby, chuckled. "That girl's sweet on you, Blackett." Vaughn couldn't help the smile that spread across his face. "Seems that way. You going to do something about it? Make it official?" The question caught Vaughn off guard, though it wasn't the first time the thought had crossed his mind. In the weeks since their first kiss, his feelings for Kate had deepened into something he recognized as love, though he had yet to speak the words aloud. "Maybe I am," he replied, picking up his hammer and returning to work. The town meeting that evening was held in the same hall where the socials took place, though the atmosphere was decidedly less festive. The mayor, a former judge named Simmons, called the gathering to order and introduced a representative from the Western Pacific Railroad. "Ladies and gentlemen," the railroad man began, "the Western Pacific is planning to extend its line through this territory, connecting Denver to the Oregon Trail. We're currently determining the precise route, and Whispering Creek is under consideration as a potential stop." A murmur ran through the crowd. A railroad connection would mean growth, prosperity, easier access to markets and goods from the east. "However," the man continued, "for this to happen, we would need certain assurances from the town and surrounding landowners. Specifically, right-of-way agreements and potentially the sale of certain parcels." The meeting grew more heated as details were discussed. Some of the town's merchants were enthusiastically in favor, seeing the potential for increased business. Several of the ranchers, including Howard, were more cautious, concerned about the impact on their operations and the potential influx of settlers. Throughout the discussion, Vaughn watched Kate. She listened intently, occasionally whispering observations to her father. When the floor was opened for questions, she stood. "Mr. Reynolds," she addressed the railroad representative, "you mentioned that the route hasn't been finalized. What other towns are being considered and what factors will determine the final decision?" The man looked slightly taken aback at being questioned by a woman, but he recovered quickly. "Coyote Creek and Riverside are the alternatives. As for factors, it comes down to terrain, cost of land acquisition, and potential for future development." Kate nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you." As the meeting continued, Vaughn found himself impressed by the civic engagement of Whispering Creek's residents. This was a community that cared about its future, that weighed decisions carefully. It was the kind of place where a man might put down roots, build a life. The thought startled him with its clarity. For the first time since the fire, he was thinking of a future, of belonging somewhere, of building something lasting. When the meeting concluded with no decisions made but a committee formed to gather more information, Vaughn, Kate, and Howard rode back to the ranch together. What do you think about the railroad? Kate asked Vaughn as they rode side by side, Howard a little ahead. Could be good for the ranch, easier to get cattle to market, he replied. But it would change things. More people, more development. Change isn't always bad, Kate said, but I'd hate to see the character of the town or the land altered too much. You love this place, Vaughn observed. I do, it's my home. She looked over at him. What about you, Vaughn? Have you thought about where home is for you now? The question hung between them, weighted with meaning. Vaughn held her gaze in the moonlight. I'm starting to think it might be here, he said quietly. Kate's smile was like sunrise after a long night. I'm glad to hear that. When they reached the ranch, Howard excused himself, claiming fatigue from the long day. As he passed Vaughn, he gave him a meaningful look and a slight nod, as if giving his blessing to whatever might transpire. Left alone on the porch, Vaughn and Kate stood close, the night sounds of the ranch surrounding them. Walk with me, Kate asked, holding out her hand. Vaughn took it, and they strolled away from the house toward a small rise that offered a view of the valley below. The moon was nearly full, bathing the landscape in silver light. It's beautiful, isn't it? Kate said, gazing out at the land that had been her home her entire life. Very beautiful, Vaughn agreed, though he was looking at her rather than the view. Kate turned to him, her face serious. Vaughn, may I ask you something? Anything? Are you happy here? With the ranch, with me? Vaughn didn't hesitate. Yes, happier than I thought I could be again. I know you still carry grief for Eliza, Kate said softly. I would never expect that to change, nor would I want it to. She was a part of your life, a part of what made you the man you are. Kate, please let me finish. She took a deep breath. What I'm trying to say is that I love you, Vaughn, all of you, including the parts that still mourn her, and I need to know if there's room in your heart for me too. Not to replace what you had, but to build something new alongside those memories. Vaughn felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. Taking both her hands in his, he drew her closer. Kate Clearwater, I love you, he said, the words feeling both strange and absolutely right on his lips. I think I've loved you since the day you thanked me for pulling you out of the path of that wagon. You brought light back into my life when I thought all was darkness. You helped me remember how to live, not just exist. Tears glistened in Kate's eyes, catching the moonlight. Oh, Vaughn, there's not just room in my heart for you, he continued, his voice rough with emotion. You've claimed a place there that's entirely your own, as essential to me now as breathing. Kate lifted a hand to his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. That's all I needed to hear. Their kiss was different from the others they had shared, deeper, more certain, a promise rather than a question. Vaughn wrapped his arms around her, drawing her against him, savoring the way she fit perfectly in his embrace. When they finally parted, both breathing harder, Kate rested her forehead against his chest. I should get back, she whispered. Father will be wondering where I am. One more minute, Vaughn said, not ready to release her just yet. They stood together under the vast Wyoming sky, holding each other, neither speaking nor needing to. In that moment, Vaughn felt a sense of peace he had thought lost forever. Later, as he walked back to his cabin, Vaughn made a decision. The next day, he would ride into town and speak with the jeweler. It was time to make plans for a future. He could now clearly envision a future with Kate. The following morning, Vaughn rose before dawn, completed his chores in record time, and rode into Whispering Creek. The town was just coming to life, shopkeepers opening their doors, the smell of baking bread wafting from the bakery. The jeweler, a German immigrant named Mueller, was polishing his display case when Vaughn entered. Mr. Blackett, he greeted him. What can I do for you today? I'm looking for a ring, Mr. Mueller, an engagement ring. The jeweler's eyebrows rose, but he smiled broadly. For Miss Clearwater, I presume? News travels fast, Vaughn remarked. In a town this size, it's no secret when a man's in love, Mueller replied. Let me show you what I have. The selection was modest but tasteful. Vaughn examined each ring carefully, trying to imagine it on Kate's slender finger. Finally, his eye was caught by a simple gold band set with a small but perfect emerald. That one, he said. The green matches her eyes. Mueller nodded approvingly. A fine choice. Miss Clearwater is a special young woman. The whole town thinks highly of her. She is special, Vaughn agreed, a warmth spreading through him at just the thought of her. After arranging payment and having the ring sized, Vaughn left the jewelry store with the small velvet box tucked safely in his pocket. He had planned to propose the following weekend, perhaps during a ride to the spot where they had first declared their love, but now that he had the ring, he found himself impatient. He decided to stop at the general store for supplies before heading back to the ranch. As he tied his horse at the hitching post, he noticed an unfamiliar wagon outside the bank across the street. 3 men stood beside it, their manner watchful, their hands hovering near their holsters. Vaughn's instincts, honed by years on the frontier, alerted him that something wasn't right. He casually made his way closer, pretending to adjust his saddle. Just then, the bank door burst open and 2 more men emerged, guns drawn, sacks in their hands. "Move it," one shouted to his companions by the wagon. The bank robbery was in progress before Vaughn could react. The town marshal, an older man named Davis, emerged from his office down the street, alerted by the commotion. "Stop right there," Marshal Davis called, drawing his pistol. One of the robbers spun and fired, the shot catching Davis in the shoulder. The marshal went down and the robbers leapt into their wagon. Without thinking, Vaughn drew his own weapon. "Hold it," he shouted. The robber with the sacks turned and fired in Vaughn's direction. He felt the bullet whiz past his ear as he dove for cover behind a water trough. From his position, he took careful aim and shot, hitting one of the robbers in the arm. The wounded man dropped his gun, cursing loudly, but the others returned fire, bullets splintering the wood of the trough. Vaughn stayed down, trying to get a clear shot at the driver. Across the street, townspeople were taking cover in doorways and behind barrels. Someone Vaughn couldn't see who fired a shotgun at the robbers, the blast kicking up dust in the street. The driver cracked a whip, and the wagon lurched forward, the team of horses breaking into a gallop. The robbers were getting away. Vaughn stood to take one last shot when he heard a familiar voice. "Stop, drop your weapons." Kate stood in the middle of the street, directly in the path of the oncoming wagon, her father's shotgun leveled at the driver. Vaughn's heart stopped. "Kate, get out of the way." But she held her ground, her posture unwavering even as the horses bore down on her. The driver, faced with the choice of running her down or stopping, hauled on the reins. The wagon skidded, nearly overturning, coming to a halt mere feet from where Kate stood. "Drop your weapons," she repeated, her voice steady. For a moment, no one moved. Then one of the robbers raised his gun, aiming at Kate. Vaughn didn't hesitate. He fired, his shot true, the bullet striking the man's hand. The gun clattered to the ground as the robber howled in pain. Taking advantage of the distraction, several townsmen rushed forward, disarming the remaining robbers. But Vaughn's focus was entirely on Kate, still standing in the street, the shotgun now lowered to her side. He ran to her, his heart pounding with fear and relief. "Kate, what were you thinking?" She looked up at him, her face pale but determined. "I was thinking they were getting away and no one else was stopping them. You could have been killed, but I wasn't." She touched his arm. "Are you all right? I saw them shooting at you." The concern in her eyes, the realization of how close they had both come to disaster, hit Vaughn with the force of a physical blow. Without thinking, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against him. "Don't ever scare me like that again," he murmured into her hair. Kate's arms went around him, her body trembling slightly now that the danger had passed. "I'm sorry. I saw them shoot the marshal and then you were in danger and I couldn't bear the thought of losing you." Vaughn pulled back to look at her, this remarkable woman who had faced down armed robbers to protect the town and him. In that moment, all his carefully laid plans for a romantic proposal evaporated. "Marry me," he said, the words tumbling out. Kate blinked, clearly caught off guard. "What?" "Marry me," Vaughn repeated, reaching into his pocket for the ring box. "I love you, Kate Clearwater. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Around them, the townspeople were securing the robbers, tending to the wounded marshal, but Vaughn was aware only of Kate, of the dawning realization in her eyes as she registered his words. "You're proposing to me, now, in the middle of the street." "I had other plans," Vaughn admitted, opening the box to reveal the emerald ring. "But seeing you standing there, so brave, so fierce, I don't want to wait another day to ask you to be my wife." A slow smile spread across Kate's face, transforming it from stunned to radiant. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and sure. "Yes, Vaughn Blackett, I will marry you." Vaughn slid the ring onto her finger, his hands steady despite the emotions coursing through him. Then, heedless of the gathering crowd, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, pouring all his love and gratitude into the contact. The sound of applause broke them apart. The townspeople had gathered around them, smiling and cheering. Mayor Simmons stepped forward, clapping Vaughn on the back. "Seems we have two reasons to celebrate today: foiling a bank robbery and an engagement. Miss Clearwater, Mr. Blackett, on behalf of Whispering Creek, congratulations to you both." Kate blushed but stood proudly beside Vaughn, her hand in his. "Thank you, Mayor." Howard Clearwater pushed through the crowd, his expression a mix of concern and pride. "Kate, are you all right? What were you thinking, confronting armed men like that?" "I'm fine, Father," Kate assured him. "And I was thinking that no one threatens my town or the man I love." Howard's gaze shifted to Vaughn, then to the ring on his daughter's finger. "I see you've already asked her." "Not quite how I planned it, sir," Vaughn said, "but yes." Howard studied him for a long moment, then broke into a broad smile. "Well, I'd say any man who's willing to face down bank robbers to protect my daughter has earned the right to marry her." He extended his hand. "Welcome to the family, son." Vaughn took the offered hand, feeling a surge of belonging that he had thought lost forever. "Thank you, sir." As the excitement died down and the robbers were led away to the jail, Vaughn and Kate found themselves walking hand in hand back toward the ranch, having declined numerous offers of celebration from the townsfolk. "I still can't believe you proposed to me in the middle of the street, right after a gunfight," Kate said, laughing softly. "I still can't believe you stood in front of a team of galloping horses to stop a bunch of bank robbers," Vaughn countered. Kate smiled up at him, her eyes shining with happiness. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" "We are." Vaughn squeezed her hand, "and I wouldn't have it any other way." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Whispering Creek. The entire town turned out for the occasion, the pews filled to capacity, flowers adorning every available surface. Kate wore a simple white dress that had been her mother's, altered by the town seamstress to fit her perfectly. Vaughn, dressed in a new suit purchased for the occasion, waited at the altar, hardly able to believe that this day, a day he had once thought impossible, had arrived. When Kate appeared at the church entrance on her father's arm, Vaughn felt his breath catch. She was radiant, her face glowing with happiness, her eyes seeking his immediately. As she walked toward him, Vaughn was struck by a profound sense of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought him to Whispering Creek, for Kate's persistence in breaking through his defenses, for the second chance at love he had never expected to find. The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises of love, respect, and partnership that acknowledged both their shared future and the paths that had led them to each other. When Vaughn spoke of honoring Kate's courage and spirit, of cherishing her for all their days, tears glistened in her eyes. When Kate vowed to walk beside him through whatever life might bring, to be his partner in all things, Vaughn found his own voice rough with emotion. As the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Vaughn bent to kiss his bride, a sense of rightness settled over him. He had not forgotten Eliza, would never forget her, but the love he felt for Kate was neither a betrayal nor a replacement of what had come before. It was something new, something uniquely theirs, born from shared experiences and mutual understanding. The celebration that followed at the Clearwater Ranch was joyous, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed the entire county. Vaughn found himself at ease among the townsfolk in a way he had never been before, no longer the solitary, grief-stricken drifter but a man with a place in the community, a future to build. As twilight fell, lanterns were lit around the yard, casting a warm glow over the festivities. Vaughn found Kate standing at the edge of the gathering, watching the dancers with a contented smile. "Happy, Mrs. Blackett?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. Kate's smile widened at the sound of her new name. "Immensely, Mr. Blackett, and you, more than I ever thought possible." Vaughn drew her into his arms, swaying slightly to the music drifting from the fiddle player's violin. "Thank you. For what? For not giving up on me, for seeing through my defenses, for showing me that a broken heart can mend." Kate's eyes softened. "You did the same for me, you know. I was so focused on the ranch, on taking care of Father, I'd almost forgotten to live for myself." "Then we've saved each other," Vaughn murmured, bending to kiss her. "I rather like the sound of that," Kate replied against his lips. As the celebration continued around them, Vaughn held his wife close, grateful for the journey that had brought him to this moment. The road had been long and often painful, but standing here with Kate in his arms, he understood that every step had been necessary, leading him not back to what was lost, but forward to what was waiting to be found. The future stretched before them, filled with promise, the ranch to run together, the family they hoped to build, the community they would help to shape. There would be challenges, of course, as there always were in the untamed West, but Vaughn faced them now with a light heart and a steady companion by his side. The cowboy who had tried to hide his broken heart had found not just healing, but a love as vast and enduring as the Wyoming sky above them. 1 year later, Vaughn stood on the porch of the small house he and Kate had built on Clearwater land, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The sound of Kate's laughter drifted through the open door behind him, followed by Howard's deeper chuckle. They were celebrating their first wedding anniversary with a quiet family dinner, a moment of peace in what had been a busy and transformative year. The railroad had indeed come to Whispering Creek, bringing with it growth and change. Vaughn, with his experience and diligence, had become Howard's full partner in the ranch, implementing new methods and expanding their operations to meet the increased demand for beef. Kate had taken on a more formal role in the business side of things, her keen mind for numbers and strategy proving invaluable as they navigated the changing market. But the greatest change had come just 3 months ago with the birth of their son, William Howard Blackett. Vaughn had never known such fierce, protective love as he felt when he first held his child, this tiny being with Kate's eyes and a tuft of dark hair like his own. Fatherhood had opened yet another chamber in his heart, one he hadn't known existed. "There you are," Kate said, stepping onto the porch with their son cradled in her arms. Father's regaling Anna with tales of his youth again. Anna was Howard's housekeeper, a widow who had come to work for them shortly after the wedding and who had, over time, become something more than an employee to Howard. Vaughn suspected there might be another wedding in the family's future, though neither Howard nor Anna had spoken of it yet. "Let him enjoy himself," Vaughn said, wrapping an arm around Kate's shoulders and gazing down at their sleeping son. "It's good to see him happy." Kate leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. "It's good to see everyone happy." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the last rays of sun disappeared behind the distant mountains. "I have something for you," Vaughn said softly. "For our anniversary." Kate looked up at him, her eyes curious. "Oh, you already gave me the locket this morning." "This is something different." Vaughn reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document. "Here." Kate shifted William to one arm and took the paper, unfolding it carefully. Her eyes widened as she read. "Vaughn, this is a deed to the Clearwater Ranch." "To the Clearwater Blackett Ranch," he corrected gently. "Your father and I had it drawn up last week. We're equal partners now, officially. You, me, and your father." Tears welled in Kate's eyes. "But why? Father already made you a partner in practice." "Because we want to make sure you always have a place here, no matter what. This land is your birthright, and now it's William's too. It's our legacy to build together." Kate handed William to him, then threw her arms around his neck, heedless of the tears now flowing freely. "I love you so much, Vaughn Blackett." Vaughn held her close with his free arm, their son nestled between them. "And I love you, Kate Blackett, more each day." As night fell fully, the stars emerging one by one in the vast Wyoming sky, Vaughn felt a deep sense of contentment. The broken-hearted cowboy who had drifted into Whispering Creek 2 years ago was gone, transformed by love, by family, by purpose. In his place stood a man fully engaged in life, with roots planted firmly in the land and in the hearts of those he loved. He thought briefly of Eliza, a gentle memory rather than a painful one. She would be pleased, he knew, to see him like this, happy, loved, building a future. The guilt that had once accompanied such thoughts was gone, replaced by a quiet gratitude for the time they had shared and for the unexpected blessing of a second chance at love. Kate lifted her face to his and Vaughn bent to kiss her, a kiss that spoke of promises kept and dreams fulfilled, of a love that had healed what was broken and created something new and enduring from the pieces. "We should go inside," Kate murmured against his lips. "It's getting chilly." "In a minute," Vaughn replied, wanting to hold onto this perfect moment just a little longer. Together, they stood on the threshold of the home they had built, their son sleeping peacefully in his father's arms, their future stretching out before them like the endless Wyoming prairie, vast, challenging, and beautiful beyond measure. And as the first star of evening appeared in the darkening sky, Vaughn made a silent promise to cherish every moment of the life he had found, the family he had made, and the love that had saved him when he least expected it, the love of a brave, determined woman who had once kissed a broken-hearted cowboy in the middle of the street and changed everything.